Hello, I'm Neil Hamilton, a professor of law at Drake University in Des Moines and director of the Agricultural Law Center. I want to welcome you to an installment in our series, Law for Landowners, 10 Things to Know. Today our topic is 10 things to understand about who else might have an interest in your property. When people think about owning land, it's easy to assume that you own it exclusively and that no one else has any interest in your land. This is true to an extent. For example, if you own land in what's called fee simple, you do have the right to own it and to sell it. But if you have another type of interest in property, for example, you lease it or you have an easement, well then you don't have that same type of exclusive ownership interest. One way to think about your rights as an owner in land is to consider the list of other people who may have an interest in your land. Here are at least 10 different types of those type of interests that might exist that you should be aware of. First, you have future owners. They may have an interest in knowing what you've done to your property. For example, have you had an open dump? Have you disposed of any hazardous materials? Future owners will have an interest in what you may have done to the property today. Second are your heirs, the people who may inherit the property from you once you pass on. They'll be bound by any of the agreements that you've entered into. For example, if you've signed a long-term lease for a wind turbine, they'll be bound by that agreement. Third, the county assessor has an interest in your property to make sure that you've paid the property taxes. Remember, if you don't pay your property taxes, your land can actually be sold so that the county can recover them. Fourth, the bank or someone who has a mortgage on your property, they'll be interested in whether or not you're current on the loans. If you aren't current, and if in fact you fail to pay, then they may be able to take a legal action against you to foreclose on the property so that they can collect the amount that you owe. Fifth are your neighbors, who hope that you use your property so as not to cause a nuisance to them. Every property owner has the right to the quiet use and enjoyment of their property, and you're protected by what's known as the law of nuisance. It applies both to what you do, but it also benefits you because it applies to your neighbors. Sixth is the state, or what you might think of as the public, because they have an interest in seeing that you comply with the environmental laws. For example, that you don't allow your soil to erode, or that you don't pollute the water or drain a wetland. And so really there is that public interest in how you use your property. Seventh, many owners may have co-owners. For example, if you own property in tenancy in common, which means you may have an undivided interest with your siblings, well then those co-owners are also going to have an interest in how your property is being used. Eighth is a tenant. If you've leased your property to someone else, they have the right to be able to enjoy that property free from your interference during that period. The tenant could also be affected by other actions that you may take in terms of how the property is being used. Ninth might be the local municipality. For example, if your property has been annexed into a city or is nearby, you're going to be subject to the zoning laws. In addition, the county that you're in may also have county zoning. And so those local authorities are going to have an interest in how you use your property and whether or not it might comply with local zoning ordinances. The 10th group of people who have an interest in your property would either be visitors, people who might come onto your property, who in particular are interested in not being harmed by conditions you've created, or even passerbys, people who are using the roads that are adjacent to your property. As a property owner, you don't have the right to obstruct what would be the public roads that might run along your property. So as you can see from this list, there are many people who may either have an interest in your property or at least have an interest in how you use it. You can see from this that many of these rights are also reciprocal. For example, you have an interest in how your neighbor uses your property. So an important thing to remember about property ownership is that your property rights are affected by the property rights of the neighbors and other people nearby to you, as well as the actions of the local government.